Hi everyone, a quick sewing project for you today. I've shown how to make these wristlet key ring holders on my YouTube channel a couple of times. I think one time was the 12 days of Christmas I did. I'll put a link to it at the end. But in the past I've only ever done them with one piece of fabric and just made them like this, but these I decided I wanted to embroider some names on, so I've done them from two different styles of fabric, and then using Embrilliance Essentials I made my names and I embroidered the name on. So if you want to know how I did this project, keep watching. Okay, so because I'm going to be doing some embroidering on these, I'm using two different colours of fabric. And my idea is that I'm going to join these together to make one long strip, which is how I normally make these. I normally make them from a strip of about 12 by 4 inches. These have been cut at 6.5 by 4 and 6 by 4. I'm going to sew them together, which will then give me my 12 by 4 strip. And then, as I say, I'm going to embroider a name on the plain section. Now, you don't have to put iron-on interfacing in. If you don't want to, it depends how flimsy or how thick your fabric is. On, some of them that I've done in the past, I've not put anything on at all, but I just thought I'd show you. So again, I would normally cut this at 11 by 3, but these are just scraps. That is about 11 by 3. This is only about 2.5 by 11, but it will do because once these are sewn together, this fabric's going to be folded in half and then in half again, so it's going to end up 1 inch wide, so it's going to become quite substantial anyway by the way that we fold it. So I'm going to put these two right side together and I'm going to take these to my sewing machine and sew down to join them together into one strip. Okay, so this is what I've got now, so I'm just going to cut them apart because I just chain pieced them. So I'm going to open them up and I'm going to fold the seam. This fabric is quite stiff. It's like as if it's been starched, so I'm going to fold the seam out flat. You could fold it to one side or the other. It's entirely up to you. So I'm just going to finger press that open. Now what I'm going to do, we'll use the one that's 11 by 3. I'm going to iron this centrally to this panel, and I'm going to do the same with this one, although this one, as I say, isn't as wide, but it doesn't really matter because it's all going to get folded. Okay, so that's my two pieces. So basically what I'm going to do now, I'm going to fold this in half so the raw open edges go together. And I'm going to press it, then I'm going to open it out and I'm going to fold the outsides in to that middle press line, but you don't want to overlap them because you don't want any bulk. You just want them to meet with like less than a 1/16 gap, because then you're going to fold it all over. If you've got too much bulk here, when you fold this over, it'll be really bulky. So I'm going to do that on both pieces with the iron. Okay, so this is what we've got now. So you can see I folded it in half, opened it out, folded the outsides in, and I left that gap. And then you're going to fold this over. Take your time with this. Don't skip the pressing because it really will give you the best outcome if you don't. And you want to make sure that these open edges that you're going to sew together are flush with each other, because I'm going to sew really, really close to the edge, right along that open edge to close it. Then I'm going to sew on the other side just to make it look a bit more decorative. I mean, what you could do, you could add another 1 or 2 lines in the middle if you want. That's entirely up to you, but this is what you're aiming for. Okay, I'm going to do that with both pieces. Okay, so that's both pieces done. So I'm going to take them to the sewing machine and sew down both long edges. So just to explain what I've done here, If you've got the ability to move your needle over, I've moved my needle over as far to the right as I can go so that I can still line the edge of the foot up with the edge of my fabric. If you don't have that ability, just, you know, move your fabric. If your needle's in the middle and you can't move it, just sew as close to this edge as you possibly can. That's what we're aiming for. Then I'm going to turn it around, and as I say, I'm just going to sew down the other side just so it matches, so it looks decorative. Okay, so that's what we've got now. So they're both sewn together with 2 rows of stitching. So what I'm going to do now is where I've got those 2, what were the open ends, I'm going to class that as the wrong side. So I'm going to make sure that they're both face down, and I'm going to put this in my embroidery machine, and I'm going to stitch out the names, and I'm going to do the 2 at the same time. So what I did, I opened Embrilliance Essentials, although you can do this directly on your embroidery machine, and I chose my 4x4 hoop, which is my small hoop, and I typed 2 names, Sue and Lisa, and I spaced them apart so that I can then position these in the hoop and do 2 at the same time. Then what I also did while I was in Embrilliance, I printed this off. Now normally I would only do this for 1 design at a time, and you've got your crosshairs and that helps you center up your design on your fabric, but because these are so little, I'm literally just going to trim this on that dash line and trim these 2 out and line them up and do it by eye and move the needle over on the machine, but I'll show you all that once my machine's set up for embroidery. But for now I'm just going to trim these out. So now that's, you know, going to fit better on my fabric. I did my letters 3/4 of an inch high because I knew this was going to end up at 1 inch. And it's going to give me more of an idea now where I can center my needle over the design. So I'm just going to do the same with this one. Okay, so I'm going to go into embroidery. I'm going to go into the USB stick, which I've plugged into the side of my machine, and I'm going to call up the design, Sue and Lisa. I'm going to change the hoop to my small hoop and close. I think that's right. It's a long time since I've done any embroidery. And then I'm just going to put the embroidery foot on and get some thread and put a bobbin in, and I should be ready for doing the sewing. I'm going to hit embroidery, and then now that should be centered in the middle of my embroidery hoop, but because I've got the pieces of paper over the fabric, I'm going to use these arrows to kind of centralize it automatically. So I just need to put my embroidery foot on, which is my W foot, but you'll see all this in a minute. Okay, so this is what I've done. I've positioned the name kind of centrally to this plain section on both of them, and I've just held it in place with a clip. And then I've put them both in my hoop. Now, because in Embrilliance I set 1 to blue and 1 to pink or red, it will sew the blue one first, then it will stop, and I'll be able to reposition if I think this isn't right. But I want to try and get them both, you know, as best I can now before I make a start. So I'm just going to go back over to the embroidery machine, put this in the machine, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to position the needle in the hope that it's going to sew these in the right place for me. So now I'm going to come back to the screen, and what I want to do using these directional arrows, I want to try and get the start point in the middle of this word Sue, so kind of in the middle of the U. So I'm going to press this up until my needle, so you can see the needle now is, if it falls, it will fall in the middle of that U. And that's about right, I think. So I'm going to remove my paper now, put the foot down. I'm going to take this one off just in case it does go down there, but it shouldn't need to. It should stay within that area of that first design now. So hopefully everything's right. So I've got white embroidery thread in the top of my machine, and I've got white embroidery fill in the bottom of the machine. I'm just going to press start, and hopefully it's going to start sewing. And that's not sewing in the right place. So I'm going to have to, I should have done a trace first, and then I would have seen it was going to start up there. So I'm just going to cancel the design and start again. Okay, I've got my USB stick in the side of the machine. I'm going to come to embroidery, to the USB stick, and I'm going to find my file for sew, because that's the one I want to do first. And it drops it into the middle of the screen. I'm going to click the word embroidery at the bottom of the screen, and you can now see it there. Now, the crosshair is in the middle of the word on the screen, but if I turn you to the actual fabric in the hoop, the needle is not in the middle of the word. So using the up and down arrows, I'm going to move the up arrow until the needle gets in the middle of that letter U, and just move it over slightly. Now that should be the middle of the word. So what I'm going to do now, back to the screen, and this button here, if I select it, when I click this, it will move the needle around my word that's on my fabric, so I can see if it's going to stitch in the right place. Sorry if I keep moving you backwards and forwards, but I just want you kind of to be able to see. So there is my word still on my piece of paper on my fabric. So I'm going to hit that little icon that I've just shown you, that little box that's made up of an arrow. And that's going to show me like where it's going to sew. And that's within that white piece of paper. So that tells me that's positioned in the right place. So I can remove that piece of paper now. I can put the foot down on the machine, and I can now start stitching. So it's telling me to check the thread, and I know you shouldn't pull it out backwards, but I just did, so I'm just going to re-thread it, which is not easy to do when there's a camera in the way. Come round here, round there, break off, and thread the needle again. And I'm going to go back a few steps on my machine. I'm going to select this plus and minus, and then I'm going to use the needle minus. So I'm going to go back 10 until my needle gets back to where I think it needs to be. So now, hopefully, if I put the foot down and carry on, it should carry on stitching. Okay, now that's finished. Now I can see that I didn't get the name positioned exactly correctly within these 2 lines of stitching that I've done, but that's my fault, not the machine's fault or not Embrilliant's, because what I originally did was put the 2 names onto one piece of paper and printed it off, and then cut the papers out as you saw me do at the beginning. So the centering, if you like, wasn't, you know, was done manually by me and visually with my little printout. But I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to bring the name back onto here, the second name. I'm going to say OK on my machine. I'm going to hit the home button. It's going to say OK. I'm going to go back to embroidery, back to the USB, and this time I'm going to call up the Lisa name and I'm going to say embroider, and that drops it into the middle of the screen. And then I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to use these up and down and side to side arrows to position the needle over the middle of this name Lisa. And again, I'm going to do the trace. So I'm just going to show you back to the screen. I'm not going to let you watch me sew this because it's just exactly the same as the first one, but then when I've sewn this, I'll show you what I'm going to do with how to finish these off. So I'm just going to trace this again now. Hopefully that should be right. So I'm going to remove that piece of paper and then I'm just going to put the foot down and I'm going to sew this next name and then I'll be back. Okay, so this is what we've got. So this one's a lot better. It's positioned more centrally within those two lines of sewing, but this one's fine. It's okay. You know, I did have a bit of a mix up at the beginning there, but that was my own fault because I'd not positioned it correctly. So I've rectified it and that's fine. So I'm going to peel away the masking tape and I'm going to take these out of the hoop. And then these are nearly finished. So two last little things to do and they're done. So I'll take those out of the hoop. I'm going to take these out of the stabiliser. I did use tearaway stabiliser. And then I'm going to pick as much of the stabiliser off the back as I can. Just going to use a seam ripper for this and just go in under that. Try not to get those stitches and just get as much of this out as I can. I've got those few stitches there where I had positioned it in the wrong place, so I just want to try and get those out. But I'll clean this up and then you don't have to get them all out. It's not vital because you're not really going to see this inside because this is going to be folded in half, but I just want to try and get it as tidy as possible. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to fold them in half. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm just going to run a straight stitch along there just to hold these two ends together. But like you can see how they're looking. Okay, so I'm just going to tidy up those threads, make sure I've got no threads hanging out of the back. And this is how they're looking now. So all I need to do now is attach my hardware. So these have got teeth. I normally put the teeth to the back. So you put that on and then you clamp it together. So I'll show you how to do that and then the projects are finished. So I thought I was recording and I wasn't, but basically I'm not sure where we got to, but I sewed the ends of the fabric together just to keep them in place. Then I got my hardware and they've got like teeth on one side, so I always put those to the back. You slide them into your fabric. I use a bit of scrap fabric and I use a pair of household pliers and then I squeeze them from one side and then I squeeze them from the other. There are proper pliers for this that you can get that are as wide as these. These are 1 inch and that's why I always start off with 12 by 4 inches, because when you fold your fabric you end up with 1 inch wide and these are 1 inch wide and they just fit nicely. So sorry about that. So that was because I'm flitting from camera to camera and from sewing machine to desk, that I thought I was recording and clearly I wasn't. But I've done other videos on these. I've got another video. I'll try and remember to put a link to it at the end of this one and then you can see how I do these properly. But they're really easy to apply. So I hope you like the project. Please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.